After dropping my husband off for his business trip, I picked my son up from school alone. We were driving home when I noticed something wrong. He hadn't touched his lunch, hadn't said a word, just sat gripping his jacket shut with both hands staring out the window. When I finally asked what was wrong, he leaned forward and whispered, "Mom, I need to show you something." He placed a small plastic bag on my lap, white powder inside. After hearing everything my son told me, I gripped the steering wheel and said quietly, "Can you pretend this never happened, just for a little while, especially around Dad?" Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Please leave a comment below and tell me how are you feeling right now. In just one word, I read every single response, and your presence here genuinely matters. Quick note, this story includes some fictional elements to highlight the lesson, but the message it carries is what truly counts. The night my husband tried to save my life was the night I should have known he was planning to end it. At 36, I had spent 8 years restoring antique paintings in my workshop on Chicago's North Side, learning to see what others missed beneath layers of damage. My name is Briar Mercer, and my job is to reveal truth hidden under centuries of lies. I should have been better at seeing it in my own kitchen. It was 6 weeks before everything unraveled. February evening, the kind of cold that makes Chicago feel like punishment. My husband Lyle, 39, an architectural engineer who once drew beautiful buildings but now mostly managed other people's projects, came home at 7:15. He placed his briefcase by the door with the same mechanical precision he'd used for 3 years of growing coldness. Then he did something unprecedented. He set an expensive jar on the kitchen table. Marine collagen powder, the kind sold in boutique wellness stores with minimalist packaging and triple-digit price tags. The jar gleamed under the overhead light, pale blue glass with silver lettering. "Your skin looks terrible lately," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I got you this, marine collagen. Drink it every morning." I stared at the jar, at him, at the space between us that had grown so wide I sometimes forgot we shared a bed. "You've never bought me supplements before," I said carefully. His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to be thoughtful. Is that a crime?" The question hung there. My art restoration training kicked in automatically, the same instinct that spots a forged signature or anachronistic pigment. Something was wrong. The details didn't align. Lyle hadn't bought me a gift in 3 years. Not for birthdays, not for our anniversary, not even a card. And now, this expensive specific delivered with forced concern and eyes that wouldn't meet mine. "Thank you," I said, because what else could I say? "That's very thoughtful." He nodded once, satisfied, and walked past me to the living room. I heard the television click on, the sound of his routine resuming me already forgotten. I picked up the jar. The powder inside was pale cream, fine as talc. The label promised youth, vitality, cellular regeneration. Marine collagen derived from wild-caught fish. Dosage 1 scoop daily in liquid. Something in my chest tightened. The next morning, he watched from the bedroom doorway as I stood in the bathroom. "Did you take it?" he asked. "I will," I said, lifting the jar, "with my coffee." He nodded, kept watching. So I opened the jar in front of him, measured 1 scoop into a glass of water, stirred. The powder dissolved into cloudy suspension. I raised the glass and remembered my seafood allergy. I lowered the glass. "Actually, let me take this with breakfast. Better absorption with food." "Fine," Lyle said. He left for work 10 minutes later. I poured the cloudy mixture down the drain and washed the glass 3 times. In my work, I peel away centuries of overpainting to find what's real underneath. I should have applied that skill to my own kitchen table. 1 week later, I was at the restoration workshop on a Tuesday afternoon. The studio smelled like linseed oil and old canvas, the scent that meant safety. I was working on an 18th century portrait, carefully removing yellowed varnish with a cotton swab dipped in solvent. The woman in the painting had been hidden under grime for decades. Now her face was emerging inch by inch, beautiful and furious. Sylvie Webb worked at the table next to mine, 32, sharp-eyed with a precision that made her invaluable for delicate gilding work. She'd been my colleague for 3 years, and the closest thing I had to a friend. "That's sweet of him," Sylvie said, glancing at my phone where I'd been looking at the collagen brand website. "Expensive brand, too." I set down my cotton swab. "I haven't drunk a single dose. Shellfish allergy. Marine collagen is basically ground up shrimp. Sylvie's hands stilled over her work. Does he know? I haven't told him. I just pretend. Pretend? Every morning I stir it in front of him. He watches. Then after he leaves, I pour it down the drain. Sylvie was quiet for a moment, her fingers resting on gold leaf she'd been applying to a frame. Why does he watch you take it? That was the question, wasn't it? I don't know, I said. He's been strange lately, checking on me more, asking about my schedule, where I go, who I talk to. How long has this been happening? 3 months, maybe? Ever since… I stopped. Since what? Since he'd started staying out later, since his mother Estelle had visited more often, since he'd taken that trip to Vancouver and come back different, since when, Sylvie pressed gently. I don't know, it's hard to pinpoint when a marriage starts dying. Looking back now, I understand my body saved me before my mind knew I needed saving. That night I went through the motions again, stirred the powder, let Lyle see me do it, poured it down the drain after he left. I kept that jar on the bathroom shelf for 5 more weeks, a testament to performance. Every morning the same ritual. Lyle would stand in the doorway watching with an expression I couldn't read. Satisfaction, anticipation, something colder. I'd scoop the powder, stir, raise the glass to my lips while he nodded. Then, alone, I'd pour the cloudy mixture down the drain and wonder why my husband needed to watch me take a supplement I was allergic to, why he'd bought it in the first place, why his concern felt like surveillance. Every morning I lied that I'd drunk it. I didn't know I was rehearsing survival. What I didn't know was that our 10-year-old son was about to see something that would change everything. Silas told me everything later at the police station in that careful, halting way children describe trauma. I have pieced it together from 3 separate conversations with him over the following weeks. This is what happened as best as I understand it. My son Silas, 10 years old that February, was playing hide and seek against himself in our hallway that morning. He'd count to 20 hide, then count to 20 again and try to find himself. The game made sense to him in ways that friendship never quite did. At 7:15, he was crouched in the hallway closet among winter coats and shoe boxes. The door was open just a crack the way he liked it, not fully hidden, because that would be cheating himself. He heard footsteps, his father's footsteps, but wrong somehow, hurried, nervous. Through the narrow opening, Silas watched Lyle enter the bathroom. Not to shower or shave. He went straight to the counter where the collagen jar sat next to my toothbrush. Lyle's hands were shaking. Silas told me later that detail first before anything else. Dad's hands were shaking, Mom, like when Grandma Estelle drinks too much coffee. Lyle reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small zip bag. Clear plastic, white powder inside. Silas pressed himself deeper into the coats, held his breath. Lyle opened the collagen jar. The sound of the lid unscrewing was loud in the quiet morning. Then he opened the zip bag and tilted it over the jar, tapping the powder out grain by grain. Silas said it looked like salt or sugar the way it caught the bathroom light. Lyle muttered something to himself. Silas couldn't hear all the words through the closet door, but years later, when I asked him to try to remember, he said, "Just enough, just like she said, nobody will know." Just like she said. Lyle took a spoon from the bathroom drawer, one of the small ones I used for face masks, and stirred the powder into the collagen. Thoroughly, carefully, making sure it was completely mixed. Then he closed the jar, twisted the zip bag closed, stuffed it deep into the bathroom trash beneath wadded tissues. He stood there for a moment staring at the jar. Silas wanted to cough. The closet smelled like old leather and mothballs. He pressed his hand over his mouth until his father finally left, walking back down the hallway to the bedroom. Silas sat in the dark among the coats trying to understand what he'd seen. He told me later that the worst part wasn't what he saw. It was realizing he couldn't ask his father why, because his father was the danger. Silas stayed in the closet for another 10 minutes. He heard the shower running. Heard me humming something off-key while water drummed against tile. Heard his father leave for work at 7:45, right on schedule. At 8:30, after I'd left for the workshop, and the house was empty except for him, Silas came out of the closet. He stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the bathroom door. Then he went inside. The collagen jar sat exactly where Lyle had left it, innocent and gleaming on the counter. But Silas saw what his father had missed in his nervousness, tiny grains of white powder scattered on the dark stone countertop. A few had spilled when Lyle poured, evidence of carelessness. Silas didn't have language for what he was feeling. He was 10. He knew his father had done something bad to something his mother used every day. He knew it was secret. He knew it was wrong. He didn't know the word poison, but he knew he needed proof. This is the part where I still cry even now. My little boy standing in that bathroom alone, making a choice that would save my life. He went to his room and got his toy kitchen set, the plastic one with miniature plates and cups and utensils. He took the smallest spoon, bright red, barely bigger than his thumb. He went back to the bathroom. Carefully, methodically, the way I'd taught him to be careful with my art supplies. He scooped each grain of white powder from the counter, one tiny spoonful at a time. He collected them in a small zip bag from his marble collection, the kind with the little plastic slider seal. The powder looked like sugar, he told me later, but it smelled wrong, bitter, chemical. When he'd collected every visible grain, he sealed the bag, stood there holding it. Mom always said if you see something bad, tell a grown-up, he whispered to himself in the empty bathroom. But Dad is a grown-up, so he made a different choice. He put the bag in his jacket pocket, the inside one where important things go, where his father kept his wallet, where grown-ups keep things that matter. This is the part where I need you to understand. My son saved my life before he could even explain what he'd witnessed. Silas went to school that morning with the zip bag in his jacket pocket. He sat through math and reading and lunch, feeling the small weight press against his ribs through his shirt. His teacher later told me he was quieter than usual, which was saying something for a child who barely spoke. He didn't eat his sandwich at lunch. Couldn't. When I picked him up at 3:45 that afternoon, he climbed into the back seat without meeting my eyes. He held his jacket closed with both hands, fingers white-knuckled on the fabric. "How was school?" I asked, pulling into traffic. "Fine," he said. "You okay, sweetheart?" "Yeah." But he wasn't. I could see it in the rearview mirror, his face pale, his jaw set in that way that meant he was trying not to cry. We drove in silence. Interstate 90 heading north toward home, gray February sky pressing down, other cars streaming past. 10 minutes of silence. Then on the shoulder near the Fullerton exit, Silas whispered, "Mom, I need to show you something." I glanced in the rearview mirror. My son's face was pale, fingers clutching his jacket closed. "What is it, sweetheart?" There is a moment between not knowing your husband wants you dead and knowing it, and that moment lasts exactly as long as it takes a 10-year-old to whisper 5 words. "Mom, I saw something bad." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small plastic bag, the kind that holds marbles. He leaned forward and placed it on my lap. White powder, maybe a teaspoon's worth. I kept driving, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. "What is this?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew. "I was hiding this morning, playing hide and seek by myself in the hallway closet. I changed lanes, signaled, merged. I saw Dad through the crack in the door. He went to the bathroom, to your collagen jar." My hands tightened on the wheel. "He had a bag in his jacket. He poured powder into your jar. Then he stirred it. Then he hid the bag in the trash." I pulled onto the shoulder, smooth controlled, turned on the hazard lights. Trucks thundered past. "Did he see you?" "No, I didn't breathe until he left. His hands were shaking, Mom." "What happened after?" "I waited till everyone left. Then I saw powder on the counter, bits Dad missed, so I got my toy spoon and collected it. I didn't know what else to do. I sat perfectly still. Semi-trucks passed, rocking the car. I don't know how long I sat there. Time felt strange, compressed, and expanded. Silas waited in the back seat, patient in the way children are when they've done something important. In those 3 minutes of silence, I peeled away every layer of the marriage I thought I had, the way I stripped varnish from old canvases, and underneath was just blank, murderous intent. The collagen jar. 6 weeks of watching me stir it. 6 weeks of satisfaction when I raised the glass to my lips. Not love, not concern, just waiting for me to die. And I hadn't drunk a single dose because of an allergy he didn't know I had. "Mom," Silas's voice was tiny. I turned to face him. My son, 10 years old, holding his jacket, looking at me with those wide brown eyes that trusted I would know what to do. "Silas," I said quietly, "you did exactly the right thing. You saved my life." His eyes filled with tears. "Is Dad trying to hurt you?" "Yes. No point in lying. He deserved truth." "Why?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." "Are you going to call the police?" I thought about that. A zip bag of powder that could be anything. A story from a 10-year-old playing hide and seek, Lyle's connections, his resources, reasonable doubt. Not yet, I said. First, I need to know what this is, and I need you to do something very hard. What? Can you pretend this never happened just for a little while? Silas stared at me. When we get home, be normal. Eat dinner. Do homework. Be regular, Silas. Dad can't know you saw anything. Can you do that? He nodded. If he asks what you did today, math test, recess, pizza for lunch. Good. If he asks why you're quiet, tired, didn't sleep good. Didn't sleep well, I corrected automatically, then almost laughed at the absurdity of grammar correction while holding evidence of attempted murder. You need to understand this about me. I don't collapse when the painting turns out to be a forgery. I document it. I picked up the zip bag, held it to the light. The powder was very fine, uniform, white with the faintest gray tinge. Did you touch this? Only with the spoon. I washed my hands after 3 times. Smart boy. I sealed the bag in my purse inside pocket with my workshop keys and emergency cash. Then I texted my supervisor, family emergency, taking tomorrow off, sorry for short notice. Sent. I needed time. I needed to know what was in this bag and how long Lyle had been putting it in my food and whether I was already dying. I turned to Silas again. We're going to Grandma's house. You're going to tell Dad if he asks that you wanted to visit. Okay. Do you understand what we're doing? Playing pretend so Dad doesn't know we know. Exactly. I pulled back onto the highway, merged into traffic, hands steady. I began calculating. The collagen jar arrived 6 weeks ago. I'd pretended to drink it every morning, but I'd consumed nothing because of my shellfish allergy, so either the powder wasn't toxic, or I should already be symptomatic, or Lyle had only recently added the poison. Silas witnessed him this morning. Day N, the first edition, or just the most recent. I thought about Lyle's behavior, the watching, the checking, the questions about how I felt, whether I had headaches. Not concern, assessment. I had maybe 36 hours before he'd expect symptoms, before he'd expect me to weaken, before whatever was in that powder did its work. 36 hours to understand what I was fighting. I took the exit toward my mother's apartment. She'd been a nurse for 40 years before retiring. She'd know what arsenic poisoning looked like. She'd know how to test this powder without alerting Lyle. She'd know how to help me build a case. Mom, Silas asked from the back seat. Yeah, baby. Are we going to be okay? I met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Yes, I said and meant it. My mother's building was a pre-war walk-up in Lincoln Park, the kind with narrow hallways and radiators that clanked. I'd texted her from the car, coming over with Silas, need to talk. She opened her apartment door and knew the way mothers do that something had changed in the 90 seconds between my text and my face appearing in her doorway. What happened? She asked. My mother, Margaret Dawson, 62, had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring emergency room intensive care oncology. She'd seen every kind of human damage. She had sharp eyes, steady hands, and the clinical calm that comes from decades of triage. I walked past her into the apartment. Silas followed quiet. Sit, she said, gesturing to the kitchen table. I sat, placed my purse on the table, pulled out the small zip bag of white powder. Lyle is trying to kill me, I said. Silas saw him put this in my supplement jar this morning. My mother picked up the bag, held it to the light. Her face didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. The collagen jar 6 weeks ago. The daily ritual of pretending to drink it. My seafood allergy that had saved me without my knowing. Silas hiding in the closet, watching through the crack as his father poured powder into the jar, hands shaking. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set the bag down carefully. Arsenic, she said. Most likely arsenic trioxide. The timeline fits. 6 weeks of setup, then contamination when he thinks you're habituated to the routine. How do you know? I've seen arsenic poisoning twice in my career. Both times the spouse. Both times they started with small doses in regular consumables. She looked at me. If you'd actually drunk this, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Cardiac arrest within hours at this concentration. Silas made a small sound. I reached for his hand across the table. But I didn't drink it. I'm okay. You're more than okay, my mother said. You're ahead of him. He doesn't know you know. She stood paced to the window, looked out at the darkening street, turned back. What's your plan? First get this tested, confirm what it is, establish evidence chain. Then I need to make him think it worked. My mother smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent 4 decades dealing with people who lied about how they got injured. Fake hospitalization, she said. Call him from the ER hysterical. Arsenic poisoning acute onset barely made it in time. He'll come to the hospital. No, you'll have Silas make the call. Child's voice crying scared, more believable. Say they won't let him in because it's critical care. I looked at my son. Can you do that? Silas nodded. What do I say? My mother pulled out a notepad, started writing. You say Dad something's wrong with Mom. She collapsed. The ambulance came. They took her to Memorial General. They said arsenic poisoning. I'm scared. She looked up. Can you cry on command? I can cry for real, Silas said quietly, because it's almost true. Sitting at that kitchen table with my mother and my son scripting lies to trap my husband, I understood we'd become something I never planned, a family of strategists. If Lyle calls you to verify, I told my mother, record every word. He'll slip. They always slip. What makes you think he'll call me? Because you're a nurse. He'll want medical details. He'll want to know if I'm really dying or if there's a chance I'll recover and talk. My mother nodded. I'll record it. And I'll tell him it looks bad. That the doctors aren't optimistic. That arsenic poisoning at this level usually means organ failure within 48 hours. Will he believe that? He'll want to believe it. I stood. I need to get the powder tested tonight. Do you know anyone? Frost Forensic Analysis, private lab on West Monroe. Hugo Frost runs it. Tell him I sent you. He owes me a favor from when his daughter overdosed and I didn't report it. She wrote down the address. 40 minutes later, I was standing in a nondescript office building, 3rd floor, facing a door, with a small brass plate, Frost Forensic Analysis. Hugo Frost was 47, thin, with reading glasses on a chain, and the cautious demeanor of someone who spent his days with evidence that could destroy lives. He examined the powder sample from Silas's toy zip bag without unnecessary questions. What am I testing for specifically? He asked. Anything that could kill someone if mixed with a daily supplement. He nodded. Didn't ask why I had it, didn't ask where it came from. This will need proper chain of custody if you're planning legal action, he said. I'm planning everything. How fast can you run this? I asked. For attempted murder. He met my eyes. I'll have preliminary results by 9 a.m., full toxicology report by noon. I need it documented for court. I know. He pulled out forms, started filling them in with clinical precision. Sample received from Briar Mercer. Date February 19, 2024. Time 7:43 p.m. Contents unknown, white powder, suspected toxin. Chain of custody initiated. Hugo sealed the powder sample in an evidence bag, the way I seal damaged paintings, before restoration, protecting what's fragile, documenting what's real. He handed me a receipt and a case number. Margaret said you'd be thorough, I said. Margaret saved my daughter's life. I'll be whatever you need me to be. I left the lab at 8:15. The powder that should have killed me was now locked in a freezer waiting for mass spectrometry and gas chromatography and all the other tests that would tell me exactly how my husband had planned to end me. 12 hours until results. 12 hours to find out who else Lyle had been talking to. Because retired nurses know arsenic, but architectural engineers don't. Someone had taught him. Someone had told him dosages, timing, delivery methods. Someone had said, just like she said, according to Silas. The answer was waiting on our home computer in files Lyle thought he'd hidden. I dropped Silas at my mother's apartment and drove back to the house alone. Lyle was still on his business trip to Seattle, not due back until tomorrow afternoon. The powder sample was locked in Hugo Frost's lab freezer. I had one night to understand what I was fighting. The house was dark when I let myself in at 9 that night, and I had exactly 12 hours before the lab results came back to find out how deep the planning went. I went straight to the home office. The computer we shared, the one Lyle thought was just for household bills and vacation planning. I sat in his chair, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the browser history. He'd used my login, my account, my digital fingerprints on every search. The first entry was from 3 months ago, clinical signs of severe depression in women. I scrolled. Painless suicide methods. How to recognize suicidal ideation in spouse. Average police investigation duration for apparent suicide. Insurance payout timeline for suicide versus accidental death. My hands went still on the mouse. He hadn't just planned to kill me. He'd planned to make it look like I'd killed myself. And he'd built the evidence trail on my own computer using my own account, so that when investigators checked after my death, they'd find months of searches about depression and suicide. Case closed, tragic, the depressed wife who couldn't cope. I kept scrolling. Natural substances that mimic heart attack. Arsenic detection in autopsy. How long before body cremated after sudden death? The last search was from 2 weeks ago, police closure rate for apparent suicide without note. He'd thought of everything. My profession taught me to look for what's hidden beneath surface layers. I just never imagined I'd have to x-ray my own marriage. I took screenshots. Every single page. Methodical, clinical, the way I photograph damaged paintings before restoration. Documentation is everything. Evidence is everything. When I finished, I had 47 screenshots showing 3 months of premeditation, all stamped with my username, my login credentials, my digital identity. If I'd died, this is what the police would have found. A depressed woman researching suicide methods. An overworked art restorer who'd been acting strangely according to her concerned husband. A tragic, but predictable outcome. I saved the screenshots to a cloud drive Lyle didn't know I had. Then I cleared my own search history and shut down the computer. It was past midnight when I drove back to my mother's apartment. She'd made up the guest room. Silas was already asleep, small and peaceful under the quilts my grandmother had sewn. I didn't sleep. At 7 the next morning, my phone buzzed. Text from Lyle. A photo, airport terminal, coffee cup, boarding pass on the table. The message read, "Landed safely. Long day of meetings ahead. Miss you both." I stared at the photo. Something was wrong with it. Not obviously wrong, just off the way a forged painting has brushstrokes that don't quite match the period. I zoomed in. The coffee cup sat on a polished glass table. Terminal lights reflected in the dark surface. And in that reflection, clear as a signature on a canvas, was a woman. Young, mid-20s maybe. Long dark hair, sitting across from Lyle at the same table. I zoomed in further. The woman was leaning forward, elbows on the table, face turned toward Lyle. Intimate. Familiar. The posture of someone who'd been sitting there all night, not someone passing by. He'd sent me proof of his alibi and accidentally sent me proof of his accomplice. I took a screenshot. Adjusted the brightness, increased the contrast, sharpened the reflection until I could see her face clearly. Dark hair past her shoulders, heart-shaped face, expensive coat, wedding ring on her left hand. Not a girlfriend, not a mistress having an affair. Something else. You have to understand, the reflection in that photo wasn't just evidence of an affair, it was evidence of a teacher, someone who knew how to kill and get away with it. Because Lyle was an architectural engineer who drew building plans and managed construction teams. He didn't know about arsenic trioxide or lethal dosages or how to stage a suicide with search history. Someone had taught him. And that someone was sitting with him at 6 in the morning in an airport terminal celebrating. I forwarded the photo to my secure cloud drive. Then I went through every photo Lyle had sent me over the past 6 months. Business dinners, conference events, airport lounges, looking for reflections, backgrounds, faces I didn't recognize. I found her in 3 other photos, always in the background, always carefully cropped out of the main frame but visible in mirrors, windows, glass surfaces. In one photo from December, I could read her name badge, Cressida Whitfield, Northwest Mutual. Insurance. Of course. I pulled up our insurance files. Found the life insurance policy Lyle had taken out on me 8 months ago. $3.2 million. I'd signed it without reading, carefully trusting him when he said it was standard financial planning. The insurance agent's name on the policy, Cressida Whitfield. My mother came into the kitchen, saw my face. "What did you find?" I turned the phone to show her the reflection in the airport photo. "Her," I said. "She's the one who taught him." I pulled out the business card I'd kept in my wallet for 2 years. Conrad Langley, private investigator. I'd used him once to authenticate a painting's provenance for a wealthy client. He was thorough, discreet, and fast. I called. "Conrad Langley," he answered on the second ring. "This is Briar Mercer. I need a full background on a woman named Cressida Whitfield. Everything past, addresses, previous relationships, criminal history, employment records." His voice sharpened with professional interest. "How fast?" "Before my husband's flight lands in 6 hours." "What am I looking for?" "Pattern," I said. "I think she's done this before." Silence on the line. Then, "Send me everything you have. I'll call you in 3 hours." I hung up and sent him the photos, the insurance documents, Cressida's name badge information. What Conrad would find in those 3 hours would prove Lyle wasn't the predator, he was prey. Conrad promised to call back in 3 hours with everything he found on Cressida Whitfield. In the meantime, I had a 9 o'clock appointment at Hugo Frost's lab to collect the toxicology results. At 9 o'clock on the morning of day N+1, Hugo Frost handed me a folder containing scientific proof that my husband had calculated my death down to the hour. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Arsenic trioxide, he said, opening the report on his desk. 10 times the lethal dose. If you'd ingested even half of what was in that sample, cardiac arrest would have occurred within 6 hours. I sat across from him in the small office that smelled like disinfectant and printer toner. The folder was thin, just 8 pages, but those 8 pages were a death sentence written in chemical formulas. Is there any scenario where this concentration could be accidental? I asked. No. Hugo's voice was flat, clinical. This was precisely measured. Arsenic trioxide comes in specific grades. The concentration in your sample matches pharmaceutical-grade material used in cancer treatment protocols. Someone acquired medical-grade poison and measured an exact lethal dose. He turned the report so I could see the numbers. Concentration levels, molecular weight, projected absorption rate through the digestive system, 6 to 8 hours from ingestion to cardiac arrest, he continued. No antidote would work at this concentration. Even if paramedics arrived within minutes, the outcome would be fatal. I looked at the numbers, tried to make them feel real. My husband had bought me a gift, watched me stir it every morning, waited for me to die. You need to understand what 10 times lethal dose means. It means my husband didn't want me unconscious or confused. He wanted me dead before anyone could call an ambulance. I've documented chain of evidence, Hugo said. The police will need this report and the original sample, which I've kept frozen at -80 degrees Celsius. The documentation shows when you delivered the sample, where it came from, how it was stored, and every test I ran. He handed me a second folder. This is your copy. Keep it somewhere safe. The original stays here until law enforcement requests it. I took both folders. They weighed almost nothing. One more thing, Hugo said. The arsenic trioxide in your sample. It's the same formulation used in targeted chemotherapy, pharmaceutical grade, not industrial. Your husband didn't buy this from a hardware store. Someone with medical access provided it. Cressida Whitfield, the insurance agent who'd been sitting with Lyle at the airport. The woman who taught him how to kill. I left the lab at 9:45 and drove to my mother's apartment. Silas was at school. We'd decided to maintain his routine, keep everything normal. My mother was waiting with her phone on the kitchen table. Ready, she asked. I nodded. We'd scripted this the night before. Silas had already made his call to Lyle at 7 that morning, crying about Mom collapsing and being rushed to the hospital. Lyle had been appropriately shocked, asking frantic questions, saying he'd catch the next flight home. Now it was my mother's turn. She dialed Lyle's number, put the phone on speaker, activated the recording app. He answered on the second ring. Margaret, is Breyer okay? Silas called me this morning. He was hysterical. She's in intensive care, my mother said. Her voice was perfect, worried, but controlled the nurse who'd seen emergencies before. They're saying acute poisoning, arsenic. I don't understand it, Lyle. What happened? Arsenic. His voice pitched higher. Where would she get arsenic? That's what I'm asking you. You live with her. What did she drink that caused this? Silence on the line. Then, I don't know, maybe the collagen. She's been taking that marine collagen supplement I bought her. My mother's eyes met mine. The doctors need to know everything she consumed, my mother pressed. When did she take the collagen? Every morning. I watched her. He stopped, caught himself. I mean, I saw her taking it before work, but I don't understand how collagen could have arsenic in it. The doctors are testing all her supplements, my mother said. They said oral ingestion, definitely, something she drank regularly. Is she going to survive? Lyle asked. The question hung there. They don't know, my mother said. The next 24 hours are critical. I'm catching a flight. I'll be there by tonight. The ICU isn't allowing visitors, family only, and even then they're limiting exposure because of the contamination risk. I'm her husband. I'll call you when there's news, my mother said and hung up. She played back the recording immediately. Lyle's voice. I don't know, maybe the collagen. She's been taking that marine collagen supplement I bought her. He told me it was oral poisoning, my mother said. But Silas never said how you got sick. He only said you collapsed and were rushed to the hospital. And I never told Lyle I'd been taking the collagen, I said. I'd been pouring it down the drain for 6 weeks. He only knew I was supposed to be drinking it because he'd been watching me stir it. My mother played the recording again. This time I heard it clearly, the half-second pause before Lyle said, collagen, the moment he realized he'd revealed what he shouldn't know. He knew the poisoning was oral because he'd put the poison in an oral supplement. He knew it was the collagen because that's where he'd hidden the arsenic. But Silas's call never mentioned the method, never mentioned ingestion. Just mom collapsed hospital arsenic poisoning. Lyle had filled in the details himself. That's a confession, my mother said. I saved the recording to 3 different cloud drives. 2 pieces of evidence now. Lab analysis proving lethal intent. Audio recording proving prior knowledge. But evidence of murder wasn't the same as understanding motive. I needed to find out what Lyle stood to gain from my death. And that meant going home to check the one thing I'd been too afraid to look at, our financial records. What I would find in our filing cabinet would prove this wasn't just about an affair, it was about $3.2 million. I drove home at 11, hands steady on the wheel, the lab report and audio recording safely stored in my mother's apartment. The house was empty. Lyle's flight wouldn't land for another 6 hours. The filing cabinet key was exactly where I'd left it 6 months ago. And what I found in the insurance folder made Lyle's arsenic look almost merciful by comparison. Life insurance policy. My name. $3.2 million. Beneficiary Lyle Mercer. I sat at the desk and stared at my signature at the bottom of the page. Dated 8 months ago, February of last year. The same week, Lyle had taken me to dinner at that expensive steakhouse downtown and told me he'd been thinking about our future, about protecting our family. I pulled out my magnifying glass, the one I use for examining brush strokes on old paintings. Held the signature under the desk lamp. The pressure was wrong. The angle was wrong. The stroke pattern didn't match the way I form my capital B. I've spent 8 years authenticating signatures on 300-year-old artwork. I know the difference between genuine and forged. I know the difference enough to know this wasn't mine. I photographed every page and emailed the images that afternoon to a certified forensic document examiner I'd used twice before for painting authentication. Dr. Patricia Sohn, who would later testify at trial that the signature showed inconsistent pressure, incorrect stroke angles, and baseline deviation incompatible with a genuine signature. I know the pressure points where a pen touches paper, the muscle memory of how someone forms letters, the tiny hesitations that make each signature unique. This wasn't my signature. Lyle had forged it. $3.2 million. That's what my life was worth to him. Not the house we'd bought together, not the savings account, not the shared future. This. He'd forged my signature on a multi-million-dollar policy, then systematically poisoned me to collect. This isn't passion, I thought, it's accounting. I photographed every page, the policy details, the premium payments, all from our joint account money I'd helped earn. The beneficiary designation, the forged signature. I photograph forged signatures for a living. I know the difference between someone trying to copy my hand and someone who actually is my hand, and this signature was a forgery by someone who'd never bothered to study the original. The insurance agent listed on the policy Cressida Whitfield Northwest Mutual. Of course, she'd sold him the murder weapon disguised as financial planning. My phone rang. Conrad Langley. I have what you need, he said. Where can we meet? Somewhere Lyle won't see us? Lincoln Park Cafe corner table, 1 o'clock. Conrad Langley was 45 with 20 years of digging through people's pasts and the tired eyes that came with knowing everyone lied about something. He was already seated when I arrived, laptop open, coffee untouched and cold. Cressida Whitfield, he said without preamble. Real name unknown. She's been using variations Cressida White, Cassandra Whitford, Christine Whitman. Always keeps the initials CW. He turned the laptop to show me a driver's license photo from Oregon. The woman from Lyle's airport reflection, younger by a few years. Long, dark hair, heart-shaped face. How many identities, I asked. At least 4 that I found, probably more. How far back does this go? Victor Hale, Portland, 4 years ago. Conrad pulled up a news article. 42-year-old man convicted of attempting to murder his wife through arsenic poisoning. His defense claimed he'd been manipulated by his girlfriend, an insurance agent named Christine Whitman, but Christine vanished 2 weeks before his arrest. I read the article. Victor's wife had survived because she'd noticed the bitter taste in her morning tea and stopped drinking it. She'd gone to the hospital with stomach pains. Doctors found arsenic. Police searched the house. Victor got 8 years. The wife she survived, barely, kidney damage, cardiac issues, but alive. Conrad pulled up another document. Victor's bank statements show $50,000 withdrawn the week before his arrest. Cash. No record of where it went. Cressida, I said. Almost certainly. She sold him the life insurance policy on his wife. $2 million convinced him his wife was the obstacle to their future together, provided the poison then disappeared with his money before the arrest. I stared at the photo of Victor Hale, handsome in a weak-chinned way. Expensive suit, the smile of someone who'd always gotten what he wanted until he didn't. Your husband isn't the first, Ms. Mercer, Conrad said quietly. And based on the sophistication of the operation, I doubt he's the second. I'm still digging. Here's what you need to understand. The moment Conrad said first victim, I stopped being the wife of a murderer and became the potential second casualty of a serial killer. She's done this before, I said, not a question. Multiple times, I think. The pattern is consistent. She targets narcissistic men, sells them massive life insurance policies on their wives, manipulates them into attempting murder, then vanishes with their liquid assets before the arrest. Why does it work? Because she picks the right men. Ones who believe they're smarter than everyone else. Ones who think they deserve more than they have. Ones who see their wives as obstacles rather than partners. Lyle. Everything Conrad described was Lyle. How does she avoid getting caught? She never pulls the trigger herself. She provides advice, access to poison, emotional manipulation. But the men do the actual poisoning. When police investigate, they find the husband with motive, means, and opportunity. She's already gone, different name, different city, different identity. Conrad closed his laptop and leaned forward. Victor Hale's wife survived because she noticed the taste was off and stopped drinking. But there's a second case I found Seattle 2 years ago. That wife didn't survive. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. Her name was Eleanor Grant, 38. Died of acute arsenic poisoning, ruled accidental until her sister pushed for investigation. By the time police realized it was murder, the husband had fled the country. They never found him. And Cressida vanished. Different name on the insurance paperwork, Cassandra Whitford. Same pattern, same technique. He paused. She's refining her approach with each attempt. Eleanor Grant died. You would have died. The concentration your lab found, that's not amateur hour. That's practiced. The question wasn't whether Cressida had done this before, it was how many times and how many bodies. I left Conrad's cafe with 2 more victims' names and the sickening certainty that Cressida Whitfield had refined murder into a business model. But I had evidence now, lab results, forged insurance audio confession. I had everything except time. Lyle's flight would land in 3 hours. I needed to get back to my mother's apartment and check on Silas. The glass of milk my mother poured for Silas at 3 that afternoon was perfectly ordinary, cold white, innocent, and watching my son's face drain of color as he stared at it. I understood that some crimes leave wounds no courtroom can address. Silas, sweetheart, I made you some... My mother stopped mid-sentence as Silas backed away from the kitchen table, eyes locked on the glass. No, he whispered. It's just milk, honey. You like milk. But Silas was already running, down the hallway to the bathroom door, slamming. I found him sitting on the cold tile floor, back against the bathtub, hands trembling. I can't look at it, Mom, he said, voice so small. I keep seeing the powder, Dad's hands shaking, the white stuff going into the jar. I sat beside him on the floor, put my arm around his shoulders. It's okay, you don't have to drink it. It's just milk. I know it's just milk, but it's white. He nodded, started crying. Not loud, just quiet tears running down his face. 10 years old, and white was now the color of attempted murder. I held Silas on that bathroom floor and understood something fundamental. You can document arsenic concentration and forged signatures, but how do you document the moment your child stops being able to drink milk? My mother appeared in the doorway holding the glass she'd poured, saw us on the floor, understood immediately. I'll get you chocolate milk instead, she said gently. The brown kind, different color entirely. Okay, Silas whispered. After he'd calmed down, after he'd drunk the chocolate milk and fallen asleep on my mother's couch, I made a phone call I'd been putting off. Quentin Prescott, the family attorney who'd handled our estate paperwork for the past 5 years. The man who'd notarized documents, filed taxes, set up trusts. The man who might know what else Lyle had been hiding. "I need to see you," I said when he answered. "Today, now." "Briar, is everything all right?" "No, and I think you know why." Silence on the line. Then 4:30, my office. Quentin Prescott was 50 with silver hair and the careful manner of someone who'd spent decades keeping other people's secrets. His office was downtown, all dark wood and law books and framed diplomas that promised discretion. I didn't waste time. I pulled out the insurance policy, laid it on his desk, pointed to my signature. "Did you process this paperwork?" He picked it up, adjusted his reading glasses, examined the signature. "2 months ago," he said slowly. "Lyle brought it in, said you'd both agreed to increase your coverage." "Look at the signature again. I authenticate historical documents for a living. That's not my signature." Quentin went very still, looked closer. I watched his face change as he saw what I'd seen: the wrong pressure, wrong angle, wrong stroke pattern. "I had no idea it was forged," he said quietly. "I'm not accusing you. I'm asking if you knew about anything else he was hiding." Quentin set the policy down, took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes. "There are things you need to know about your husband," he said. "Things I can't say as his lawyer, but as a witness that's different." "What kind of things?" He sat back in his chair. The afternoon sun came through the windows, making the dust motes visible. "When you hire a lawyer, you expect them to serve your interests," Quentin said. "But sometimes you realize you've been serving someone else's crimes instead. Watch what happens when a lawyer realizes he's been used, the professional mask cracks, and underneath you see someone who went to law school believing in justice, not just procedure." "Lyle has been using my services for financial restructuring for the past 18 months, Quentin continued. "I thought he was managing investments, making portfolio adjustments, normal wealth management. But, but last month I started seeing patterns that didn't make sense. Loans against assets you both owned, large cash withdrawals, investment accounts showing massive losses that he'd tried to hide by shifting numbers between accounts." "How massive?" Quentin opened his desk drawer, pulled out a file, spread 3 bank statements across his desk, each one marked with red annotations in his meticulous handwriting. "Your husband has $1.8 million in gambling and stock speculation debt," he said. "He lost it over the past 2 years, casinos online trading cryptocurrency investments that collapsed. He's been hiding the losses by borrowing against your shared assets." I stared at the numbers, the red ink, the cascade of bad decisions. "He mortgaged your shared assets using your name as collateral on 3 separate bank loans, without your knowledge or signature," Quentin continued. "Your house, your workshop, even the car titles, all leveraged to cover his gambling debts. 3 separate forgeries. At minimum. I didn't realize they were forgeries at the time. I processed the paperwork he brought me, but now seeing this insurance signature," he gestured to the policy, "I should have looked closer. Without the insurance payout from my death." Quentin met my eyes. "He'd be bankrupt within 6 months. The creditors are already circling. He took out the last loan 5 weeks ago. The first payment is due next month, $60,000 he doesn't have." The financial picture was complete now, and it was worse than murder. It was mathematics. $1.8 million in debt turns out to have a very specific anatomy when a lawyer spreads it across a desk. 3 separate frauds, 3 forged signatures, 3 nooses Lyle had tied around my name. Quentin laid out the documents in chronological order. "Loan 1, he said, tapping the first folder. $800,000, 18 months ago, Chicago First Bank. Secured against your shared property, the house on Ashland Avenue. Your signature on the collateral agreement." He slid the document toward me. I looked at my name. The loops were wrong, the baseline was wrong, everything was wrong. "Loan 2. Second folder. $600,000. 1 year ago, Midwest Capital Lending. Secured against your art restoration workshop and equipment. Another forged signature. Loan 3. Third folder. $400,000. 6 months ago. Heritage Trust. Secured against both cars and your joint investment accounts." I stared at the paper trail of my husband's desperation. "All within 18 months, Quentin said. Progressive escalation. Each loan used to pay off interest on the previous ones while continuing to gamble." "How did I not know?" "Because he used your joint property as collateral on each one. The notices went to his office address. You were listed as co-borrower, but all correspondence was directed to him. Here's what 18 months of secretly destroying your wife's financial future looks like when documented 3 folders, each thicker than the last, each representing a deeper level of desperation. I asked him about those signatures 6 months ago, Quentin continued. When the third loan came through for notarization, the signature looked different from the ones I had on file. I mentioned it. What did he say? That you'd signed while I was out of the room, that you'd been in a hurry, that everything was fine. Quentin looked at me. I believed him. I shouldn't have. You weren't the one committing fraud. No, but I facilitated it. He pulled out another document. This is a full accounting of where the money went. I had to piece it together from bank statements he gave me for tax preparation. I looked at the breakdown. Casino transactions, online gambling platforms, high-risk stock trades, cryptocurrency speculation that had crashed. He lost everything, I said, and then kept borrowing more to try to win it back. Classic gambling addiction spiral. The first payment on the last loan, due in 3 weeks, $60,000. He doesn't have it. Without liquidating your assets, he can't make the payment. Default would trigger all 3 loans, calling the full amount due immediately. Which means total financial collapse, foreclosure on your home, seizure of your workshop, bankruptcy. Quentin paused. Unless he had $3.2 million from a life insurance payout. The mathematics of murder. I'll testify, Quentin said. About the loans, the forgeries, his explanations, all of it. I'll provide copies of everything and appear as a witness. Thank you. I should have looked closer 18 months ago. I should have verified. You trusted your client. That's not a crime. No, but it enabled one. I left Quentin's office at 6:15 with copies of all 3 loan documents, the accounting breakdown, and his written statement offering to testify. Back at my mother's apartment, Silas was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of chocolate milk, the brown kind, and the script we'd written together. Are you ready? I asked. He nodded. I practiced while you were gone. Grandma helped. My mother stood by the sink, arms crossed, face set. It's 6:30, she said. Lyle should be at his hotel in Seattle by now. Silas picked up my mother's phone. We'd use hers so Lyle wouldn't see my number on caller ID. I sat beside my son, put my hand on his shoulder. Remember, I said, you're scared, you're confused, you don't understand what's happening, you just know Mom is sick and you need Dad. I can do it, Silas said, then quieter, I want to do it. He dialed. Lyle answered on the 3rd ring. Margaret is Breyer. Dad? Silas's voice cracked perfectly. Dad, it's me. Silas, why are you calling from your grandmother's phone? Dad, they took Mom to the hospital. Tears in his voice now, real tears, or fake tears, I couldn't tell. Memorial General, the ambulance came and everything. And what happened? This morning, she collapsed. The doctors said, Silas's voice broke. They said arsenic poisoning. She's really sick, Dad. Silence on the line. I could almost hear Lyle's heart racing. Arsenic. His voice was higher than normal. Where would she get arsenic? I don't know. I'm at Grandma's house. I'm scared, Dad. When are you coming home? Lyle's voice steadied. I'm booking a flight right now, buddy. I'll be there as soon as I can. Is Mom going to be okay? I don't know. Let me talk to Grandma. She's talking to the doctors. It's just me here. Okay, I'm getting the next flight out. I'll text you when I land. Okay. I love you, Silas. Love you too, Dad. Silas hung up, sat very still for a moment, then looked at me. He's coming, he said. He sounded worried. Watching my 10-year-old son cry fake tears to trap his father felt like the moment when you realize the painting you're restoring is too damaged to save. You can only document what used to be. You did perfectly, I told him. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Text from Lyle. Flight lands O'Hare 9 a.m. tomorrow. Tell Silas I'm coming. I showed my mother the text. She checked the kitchen clock. 6:47 p.m. You have 14 hours. 14 hours and 13 minutes to be precise. Lyle would land at O'Hare at 9 tomorrow morning, day N+2. He'd take a taxi straight to the hospital expecting to find me dead or dying. Instead, he'd find police and every piece of evidence I'd spent the past 36 hours collecting. My husband was flying home thinking he'd won. What he didn't know was that 4 weeks ago, I'd already taken the one thing he was killing me to get. At 9 o'clock that night, sitting alone at my mother's kitchen table with 14 hours until Lyle's arrest, I thought about the one move I'd made that he didn't know about the move I'd made 4 weeks before I even knew I needed saving. Silas was asleep in the guest room. My mother had gone to bed. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator clanking and the sound of traffic on the street below. I spread the evidence across the table. Lab report, audio recording, forged insurance policy, bank fraud documentation, Conrad's research on Cressida's pattern, computer screenshots of the staged suicide narrative, 7 pieces of proof that my husband had tried to murder me. But there was an 8th piece he didn't know about. 1 month ago, 4 weeks before Silas witnessed Lyle contaminating the collagen jar, I'd been sitting at our kitchen table at home going through bank statements, trying to reconcile our accounts the way I did every month. The numbers didn't match. Nothing dramatic. Just a deficit I couldn't explain. Money that should have been there wasn't. Transfers I didn't remember making. I'd asked Lyle about it. I moved some funds around, he'd said. Investment opportunities, I'm handling it. But the way he'd said it, too quick, too dismissive, had triggered the same instinct I use when examining questionable signatures on old paintings. Something was wrong. I couldn't identify what exactly, just that something was. So I'd done what I always do when I suspect a painting might be damaged beneath the surface. I protected the original before attempting the repair. I transferred the house deed into my mother's name. In art restoration, you always make a copy before removing varnish. Protect the original before attempting the repair. 1 month ago, I made a copy of my financial life and locked it away. It was supposed to be divorce insurance. A precaution. If Lyle was hiding money or planning to leave, I wanted our shared assets protected in a way he couldn't liquidate or use as leverage. I'd gone to the notary on a Tuesday afternoon, told Lyle I was meeting a client about a painting authentication, filed the paperwork transferring our home, the house we'd bought together 8 years ago, into my mother Margaret Dawson's name as trustee. Legally, I no longer owned it, which meant legally Lyle couldn't inherit it when I died. Sitting at my mother's table now with arsenic test results and forged signatures spread before me, I understood what I'd actually done. I'd saved my own life without knowing I was doing it. Because Lyle's plan, the entire architecture of his murder plot was built on inheritance. Marry the successful art restorer. Wait until she builds a valuable business. Take out massive life insurance. Stage her suicide. Collect the payout and inherit her property. Except the property wasn't mine anymore. I'd transferred it to my mother's name on January 15th. Lyle had started contaminating the collagen jar according to the computer search history on January 18th. 3 days after the house legally ceased being mine, he'd been killing me to inherit property that was already gone. The dark satisfaction of that realization settled over me like varnish hardening on canvas. 1 month ago, I was preparing for potential divorce. Turned out I was preparing for attempted murder. I thought about Lyle's face when he found out, when he realized that even if he'd succeeded, even if I'd drunk the poisoned collagen and died of cardiac arrest within 6 hours, he'd have gotten nothing. The house he'd mortgaged against fraudulent loans wasn't legally mine to will to him. The assets he'd been counting on inheriting had been protected before he'd poured the first grain of arsenic. He'd risked everything for nothing. Here's the part Lyle didn't understand about marrying someone who authenticates forgeries for a living. We're trained to spot what's wrong before we can explain why. I stood up from the table, walked to the window, looked out at the Chicago street below, dark and quiet at 9:40 p.m. Tomorrow morning, Lyle would land at O'Hare expecting to rush to the hospital, expecting to find me dead or dying, expecting to play the grieving husband, collect the insurance money, inherit our shared property, and start fresh with Cressida. Instead, he'd find Detective Garrett waiting with 7 pieces of evidence proving premeditated attempted murder. And when the prosecutor asked about motive when they presented the forged insurance policy and the fraudulent loans when they showed he was killing me for money and property, the defense would try to claim the house as his inheritance right. That's when I'd produce the 8th piece of evidence, property transfer documentation dated January 15th, 4 weeks before the poisoning began, proving the house wasn't mine to inherit. Proving Lyle had been meticulous about everything except checking ownership records. Proving that the art restorer he'd married was better at protecting valuable things than he'd anticipated. I went back to the table, started stacking the evidence in order. 1 lab report from Hugo Frost. Arsenic trioxide 10 times lethal dose. 2 audio recording of Lyle's phone call to my mother mentioning oral poisoning method when he shouldn't have known. 3 forged life insurance policy. $3.2 million. 4 Quinton's documentation of 3 fraudulent bank loans totaling $1.8 million. 5 Conrad's research file on Cressida Whitfield's pattern of serial predation. 6 computer screenshots showing 3 months of staged suicide search history on my account. 7 airport photo with Cressida's reflection in the glass proving conspiracy. 8 property transfer deed dated January 15th nullifying inheritance motive. I looked at the clock 9:47 p.m. 13 hours until Lyle landed. 13 hours until he walked into the trap he'd built for me and found himself caught instead. Lyle would inherit something after all, just not what he'd planned. He'd inherit 14 years in prison. The only question left was whether the woman who'd taught him to kill would get caught too. Cressida would have to wait. First, I needed to make sure Lyle couldn't escape. I walked into the Chicago Police Department at 8 o'clock on the morning of day N+2, carrying 14 months of marriage in a leather portfolio, except every page was evidence of attempted murder. Detective Dwight Garrett met me in the lobby. I'd called ahead at 7 that morning, told him I had evidence of attempted homicide by poison. He'd told me to come immediately. His office was small, fluorescent lit, with a desk covered in case files and a window overlooking the parking lot. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Show me what you have," he said. I opened the portfolio. 6 independent pieces of documentary evidence, I said. Each one proves a different element of my husband's attempt to murder me. I laid them out in order. 1 laboratory analysis from Frost Forensic Lab. Arsenic trioxide at 10 times the lethal dose found in powder my 10-year-old son collected from our bathroom counter after witnessing his father contaminate my supplement jar. Garrett picked up the report. Read it carefully. 2 audio recording of my husband mentioning oral poisoning method during a phone call about my supposed hospitalization knowledge he shouldn't have had unless he administered the poison himself. I played 30 seconds. Lyle's voice saying, "Maybe the collagen," when no one had told him how I'd supposedly been poisoned. Garrett's expression didn't change, but he made a note. 3 life insurance policy for $3.2 million with forged signature. I authenticate historical documents professionally. This signature isn't mine, wrong pressure, wrong stroke angle, amateur forgery. Garrett examined the signature. You can prove this. I can provide exemplars from the past 10 years. Bank documents, legal papers, art restoration contracts. Every signature I've ever made, none of them match this one. 4 airport photograph my husband sent as an alibi. Look at the reflection in the glass table surface woman sitting across from him. That's Cressida Whitfield, the insurance agent who sold the policy. She's his accomplice. Garrett zoomed in on the photo, studied the reflection. 5 computer search history from my account, showing 3 months of staged suicide research depression symptoms, painless methods, police investigation duration. Lyle was building a narrative where my death would appear self-inflicted. Garrett spread my evidence across his desk, like I spread damaged canvases across my restoration table, each piece telling part of the story, but only the full picture revealing the crime. 6 testimony from our family attorney documenting 3 fraudulent bank loans totaling $1.8 million, all secured with forged signatures using my name as collateral. My husband has massive gambling debt and was facing bankruptcy without the insurance payout from my death. Garrett looked up. Most domestic cases come in with 1 piece of evidence, a bruise, a threat, maybe a witness statement. You're giving me 6 independent proofs spanning toxicology, audio forensics, signature analysis, photographic evidence, digital records, and financial fraud. I restore paintings for a living, I said. I know how to document damage and prove intent. When does your husband return? His plane lands at O'Hare at 9 this morning. He thinks I'm dead or dying in the hospital. He's expecting to inherit everything and collect the insurance payout. Garrett checked his watch. That's in 53 minutes. We need to move fast. There's one more thing, I said. My husband's phone. Can you access it with a warrant? If I have probable cause, which I do based on this evidence, yes. Why? Because people who plan murders this carefully usually document their plans digitally, and my husband is meticulous. Garrett made a phone call. 20 minutes later, we were in the digital analysis room with a specialist named Torres, who'd accessed Lyle's phone records through emergency warrant. Scheduling app, Torres said, typing. Looks like he's got something set to auto-send tomorrow. Can you preview it? Garrett asked. Torres pulled it up on the screen. Message scheduled for day N+3, 9 a.m. to Cressida Whitfield's number. Everything's done. Police ruled it suicide from depression history. Life insurance claim filed. No investigation. Time to collect. Meet me at the usual place Friday. Garrett leaned back in his chair. He scheduled this to send tomorrow at 9 a.m., 24 hours from now, a celebration text to his accomplice. Can you stop it from sending? I asked. Why would I? This is his confession in his own words from his own device, written in advance, scheduled to auto-send completely unprompted by police questioning. Here's what you need to know about automated messages. They don't lie. They don't forget. And they don't care that you've been arrested. They send exactly what you programmed exactly when you scheduled it. The message activates 24 hours from now, Garrett said. Your husband will already be in custody. His phone will confess for him. He can claim it's fabricated, I said. Not when it comes from his own phone sent via his own scheduling app, using his own login credentials from our evidence locker. The metadata alone proves he wrote this before we ever contacted him. Torres printed screenshots, timestamps, scheduling logs, digital fingerprints proving Lyle had composed this message yesterday expecting me to be dead by the time it sent. Garrett looked at his watch. 10:23 a.m. Your husband's plane lands in 40 minutes. We'll have units positioned at your residence by 11. He closed the evidence folder, stood up. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., his phone will send that message while sitting in our evidence locker. But today, at 11, he walks into his house expecting to find you dead. He looked at me directly. Do you want to be there when we arrest him? I said yes because I needed to see his face when he realized I was alive. I left the police station with Garrett at 10:30, planning to be at the house by 11 for the arrest. Lyle's plane was landing in 30 minutes. That's when my phone buzzed with a bank notification. Emergency alert, large withdrawal detected on joint account ending in 4721. Contact your branch immediately. I stopped walking, opened the notification. $847,000. Withdrawn at 9:15 this morning. Co-signer authorization Estelle Cressida Hampton. I stared at the name. Lyle's mother. The woman I'd met exactly twice in 6 years of marriage, always kept at a careful distance, always introduced simply as my mother, without details. Her full legal name was Estelle Cressida Hampton, the same woman Conrad had found in Lyle's airport photo. The same woman who'd sold us the life insurance policy under the alias Cressida Whitfield. She'd been in my life from the beginning. I just hadn't known her real name. Problem? Garrett asked. I showed him the phone. He swore quietly. That's your joint account. Everything we had. Savings, emergency fund, workshop, operating capital, all of it. We drove to the bank. The manager, a nervous man named Peters, was waiting. I'm so sorry, he said. She had valid co-signer authority from when the account was opened. ID matched. Authorization documents were in order. Show me the security footage, I said. Peters pulled it up on his computer. 9:15 that morning. A woman in her 60s, dark hair, sunglasses, indoors, even though it was February. Cressida Hampton, Lyle's mother, whom I'd met exactly 3 times in 12 years of marriage signing withdrawal forms. The bank smelled like fresh coffee and sanitizer. I noticed Peter's hands trembling as he showed the footage. Cressida wore sunglasses indoors, signed documents without reading them. The pen she used was still on the desk cap, off ink dried. Wire transfer, Peters said, to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, irreversible once processed. When did it process? 9:47 this morning, 2 hours ago, while I was presenting evidence to Garrett, while Lyle's plane was in the air. His mother had emptied our accounts and fled to the Caribbean. She knew, I said. Lyle told her the plan, told her I'd be dead, told her to take the money before the investigation started. Garrett made a call. We need a warrant for Cressida Hampton, international flight risk, suspected conspiracy to commit murder. But I knew she was already gone. We left the bank at noon. I was supposed to be at the house for Lyle's arrest, but Garrett's phone rang first. Conrad, he said, answering. Then his face changed. When? How long ago? He listened. I see. Yes, she's with me now. He hung up, pulled the car to the curb. Conrad's been coordinating with Seattle PD on the Marcus Webb case, Garrett said. The one Lyle supervised 4 years ago, the wife who died of arsenic poisoning. Gwen Webb. Yes, Conrad just got the full case file. It's worse than we thought. Before I reveal what Conrad found in Seattle, before I tell you how many women didn't survive, comment. A, if you think Lyle planned this alone, or B, if someone taught him how to kill. Please note what follows contains recreated details for narrative purposes. If that's uncomfortable, this is a good place to stop. Garrett opened his laptop, showed me the file. Marcus Webb, 41, structural engineering supervisor. Lyle's direct manager at the firm. Webb's wife, Gwen, 34, died in November 2021 after 6 months of deteriorating health. Doctors initially thought it was autoimmune disorder, then organ failure, then finally arsenic poisoning from contaminated herbal supplements. Marcus collected $1.1 million in life insurance, paid off $980,000 in gambling debts. Case was ruled accidental death. Lyle had been Webb's protege. They traveled together to Vancouver casinos, worked late together, met for drinks. They taught each other, I said. Gwen Webb wasn't just a case file. She was someone's daughter, someone who'd trusted the wrong man, someone who didn't survive to transfer property or call detectives, someone who'd actually died while I'd been saved by an allergy I didn't know mattered. I was alive only because Sylvie noticed my symptoms, only because Silas witnessed the contamination, only because I'd married someone too arrogant to check if I was actually drinking the poison he prepared. Gwen Webb had no Sylvie, no Silas, no second chance. Conrad's coordinating with Seattle PD, Garrett said. They're reopening Webb's case, looking at Marcus's current location. Where is he? Unknown. He left the country 6 months after Gwen died. No extradition treaty. So Lyle had learned from a successful killer who'd gotten away with it. We sat in Detective Garrett's office studying the arrival times. Lyle's flight from Seattle was scheduled to land at O'Hare at 7:42 tomorrow morning. Garrett calculated that by the time Lyle cleared baggage and caught a taxi, he would arrive at our residence on Ashland Avenue around 9 a.m. Garrett decided we would not intercept him at the airport. He wanted Lyle to walk directly into the environment where the crime was committed, completely unaware that his trap had been turned against him. Units would be positioned inside the house, waiting in the kitchen and the living room. Garrett looked at his watch. 10:23 a.m. Your husband's plane lands tomorrow morning. We'll have units positioned at your residence by 8:30. He closed the evidence folder, stood up. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., his phone will send that automated message while sitting in our evidence locker. But today we prepare the perimeter. He walks into his house expecting a tragedy, but he will find handcuffs. He looked at me directly. Do you want to be there when we arrest him? I said yes because I needed to see his face when he realized I was alive. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. Text from Lyle. Flight lands O'Hare 9 a.m. tomorrow. Tell Silas I'm coming. I showed Garrett the text knowing my husband was flying home thinking he'd won. I told Silas Daddy had been delayed, that there was a problem with his flight, that he'd call soon. I hung up before my voice could crack. The conversation about arrest would have to wait. First, I needed to understand how Lyle had planned to frame someone else for the poison. Vernon Rawlings didn't know his gym locker had been turned into a crime scene until the detectives showed him the empty vial. I watched through the one-way glass at the police station as Garrett sat across from my personal trainer in the interview room. Vernon was 32, built like someone who lived at the gym, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been questioned by police before. This was in your locker, Garrett said, sliding a photo across the table. Arsenic trioxide, medical grade. The vial's empty now. When did you last see it full? Vernon picked up the photo. His face went pale. I keep that for ant problems in my car. It's not for people. Why would I poison anyone? Your client's husband accessed your locker 6 months ago. Gym security footage shows him alone in the locker room for 7 minutes. You have cameras. Vernon looked at the photo again. Lyle Breyer's brother. Brother. He told me he was her brother. Said he was concerned about her safety because she'd been acting strange. Asked if I could let him into the locker room to check if anyone had been following her. Said she was paranoid, but he wanted to make sure. Garrett made a note. Breyer's married, to Lyle. He's not her brother. Vernon's expression shifted, understanding dawning. He took the arsenic from my locker, and if Breyer had died, you'd have been the prime suspect, your poison, your access to the victim, your opportunity. I watched through the glass as Vernon realized he'd been a pawn in a murder plot he never knew existed. The rage I expected to feel never came. Just cold, tactical satisfaction that another piece of Lyle's plan had collapsed. Garrett finished the interview at 4:30. Vernon agreed to testify, signed a statement, left looking shaken. I met Garrett in the hallway. "He's clean," Garrett said. "Just unlucky enough to have arsenic for pest control and a locker Lyle could access." Lyle was building a backup plan. If the poisoning was discovered before I died, investigators would find the source traced to Vernon, my personal trainer. Easy to suggest an affair. Easy to suggest jealousy when I chose my husband. "Your husband is methodical." I said, "now he's just arrested." I drove to my art restoration workshop at 5. The space I'd built over 8 years, the place that smelled like home, linseed oil, old canvas, the chemical tang of solvents. Sylvie was waiting. My colleague, 32, with the steady hands of someone who'd spent years doing delicate gilding work on damaged frames. The woman who'd first noticed my symptoms 6 months ago and insisted I see a doctor. "I brought the hard drive," I said. For 14 months, I'd been secretly recording conversations with Lyle. At first, because I thought I was losing my memory, he'd tell me things, then deny saying them. I'd record to prove to myself I wasn't going crazy. Turns out I was just married to someone trying to make me think I was. 200 hours, Sylvie said, plugging the drive into her computer. "We need to get this down to 30 minutes for trial. Most damaging statements only." We started listening, sorting, marking timestamps. The workshop smelled like linseed oil and old canvas. My hands trembled as I dragged the audio timeline marker, hearing Lyle's voice loop over and over. "You're imagining things again." October 15th, Lyle telling me the bank deficit I'd noticed was my math error. November 3rd, Lyle explaining away my sudden dizzy spells and telling me the tests were inconclusive. December 20th, Lyle insisting I'd agreed to the life insurance policy I had no memory of signing. January 9th, Lyle saying my mother was trying to turn me against him by suggesting I seemed unwell. "This one," Sylvie said, marking a clip, "where he tells you the doctor is lying about the arsenic test. That's textbook gaslighting." "I recorded every conversation for 14 months thinking I was going crazy," I said. Sylvie looked at me. "No, you were building your case. This is your weapon." We compiled 30 minutes of systematic abuse. Financial control, gaslighting, manipulation. Lyle's voice over and over, denying reality, rewriting history, making me doubt my own perception. Every recording was dated. Every timestamp proved when he'd said what. Every file was backed up in 3 locations. "Export it," I said. "The prosecutor will need this." Sylvie started the export process. The progress bar crept forward. Then she paused. "There's another recording here," she said, "from 6 weeks ago. It's marked differently." She clicked it. Lyle's voice filled the workshop. "If anything happens to me, make sure Silas knows his mother killed me. Make sure he knows I tried to protect him from her. Make sure everyone knows she was violent, paranoid, dangerous. I'm recording this because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what she might do." The recording was dated day N-45, 6 weeks before Silas witnessed the poisoning. 3 weeks before I'd even confronted Lyle about the bank discrepancies. Sylvie stopped the playback. "He planted this," she said, "on your recording device. So if you died, investigators would find it mixed in with your evidence. They'd think you'd been planning to kill him and he'd been documenting his fear." "Counter-narrative," I said. "If I'd drunk the poison and died, police would have found my computer with staged suicide searches. Found this recording suggesting I'd been violent, and he'd been afraid. Found the forged insurance policy that would look like I'd tried to trap him financially. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered would have been reframed as me being the aggressor. Lyle hadn't just planned to murder me, he'd planned to destroy my credibility posthumously. I signed the waiver allowing police to stage the arrest inside my home without reading a single word. Detective Garrett slid the form across his desk at 7 o'clock that evening, the fluorescent lights of the precinct casting harsh shadows across the tactical diagrams he'd sketched. The paper detailed liability permissions, potential property damage during the operation. I picked up his pen and signed my name at the bottom. "You're sure about this?" Garrett asked. "Once we're inside, there's no calling it off." "I'm sure." I set the pen down. Garrett leaned back in his chair. "He's not running. Men like him don't run. They think they're untouchable right up until the cuffs click." I thought about Lyle's recording, the one where he'd narrated his plan to frame me. His voice calm and methodical as he detailed how he'd steal arsenic from Vernon's locker, how he'd make it look like I was the poisoner. Garrett had listened to the entire 14 hours of compiled audio this afternoon. "The recording he made," I said. The one where he claims I confessed to planning his murder. You're certain it won't? Ms. Mercer. Garrett's tone was firm. That recording is evidence of premeditation. He documented his own frame job. Any halfway competent prosecutor will use it to establish malice aforethought. The fact that he tried to build a counter-narrative only proves how calculated this was. I nodded, but my hands were still shaking. Garrett noticed. You're not having second thoughts. It wasn't a question. I met his eyes. No. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm turning my home into a battlefield. The place where my son takes his first steps, says his first words tomorrow morning. It becomes the place where police arrest his father for attempted murder. The weight of it settled into my chest like sediment. Our home. The nursery I'd painted yellow because Lyle said it would be calming. The kitchen where we'd shared breakfast 3 days ago, where he'd kissed my forehead and told me he'd be back soon. Tomorrow that kitchen would have an officer standing in it, waiting to take him down if he became violent. The alternative, Garrett said quietly, is that it becomes the place where he succeeds. I stood. I'll be there at 8:30, door unlocked. Garrett walked me to the precinct entrance. The February air bit through my coat. Get some sleep tonight, Miss Mercer. Tomorrow's going to be long. I drove to my mother's apartment where Silas was staying. When I arrived at 10 p.m., Margaret was washing dishes in the kitchen and Silas was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by crayons. He's been drawing for an hour, my mother said, drying her hands. Won't let me see what he's making. I knelt beside him. What are you working on, sweetheart? Silas looked up at me with those serious gray eyes, Lyle's eyes. He held up the paper. My breath caught. The drawing was crude the way all 4-year-old art is crude, but the meaning was unmistakable. On the left side, a stick figure man behind thick black bars, his face a circle of angry scribbles. On the right side, a woman and a small child holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun, both of them smiling. Between the two halves, Silas had drawn a thick black line. That's Daddy, Silas said, pointing to the figure behind bars. He's in timeout for being bad. He pointed to the woman and child. That's you and me. We're safe. The crayon wax smell was overwhelming suddenly, that specific scent of paraffin and pigment, the smell of childhood and innocence. The blue crayon in Silas's hand had worn down to a nub from how hard he'd pressed to make the bars dark enough. The yellow sun had been colored so enthusiastically that wax had built up in thick layers, making it three-dimensional. I pulled him into my lap. How did you know Daddy needs a timeout? Silas leaned his head against my chest. He makes you sad. He made you sick. People who make people sick need timeouts. That's the rule. 10 years old, and he'd already mapped the situation with the clarity adults spend months in therapy trying to achieve. Children know. They always know when something is wrong, when someone is dangerous. We just don't listen because we can't imagine they understand. My mother stood in the kitchen doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth. I held Silas until his breathing deepened and slowed, until his weight went heavy with sleep. Margaret helped me carry him to the guest bed and I tucked the drawing carefully into my bag. In my car, I pulled out my phone and opened Lyle's last email. The flight confirmation Delta 2847 arriving 7:42 a.m. at O'Hare International Airport, Gate B7. Tomorrow morning, he'd collect his luggage, climb into a taxi, give the driver our address. He'd pay the fare, walk up our front steps, use his key to open the door. He'd be thinking about the final dose, about how much arsenic it would take, about the obituary he'd probably already drafted in his head. He'd be thinking about how he'd almost gotten away with it. I started the car and drove home, Silas's drawing on the passenger seat beside me. The stick figure behind bars, the woman and child in sunlight. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. my son's crayon prophecy would come true. The taxi pulled up at 8:51, 4 minutes early, and my hands stopped shaking the moment Lyle stepped onto the sidewalk. I stood in the doorway of our home wearing the blue dress he'd always liked, my hair down, lipstick perfect. Behind me in the foyer, Officers Chen and Martinez waited in position. Detective Garrett stood in the living room just out of sightline from the front door. The third officer was in the kitchen. Across the street, the unmarked vehicle idled. Lyle paid, the taxi driver pulled his carry-on from the trunk and walked up our front steps with the ease of a man who thought he was coming home to finish what he'd started. He saw me in the doorway and froze. For 3 seconds, neither of us moved. I watched the confusion cross his face. First, why was I standing? Why was I dressed? Why wasn't I in the hospital, barely clinging to life? Then came the calculation, his eyes darting past me into the house, searching for an explanation that would make this make sense. Briar, he said, his voice careful. You're supposed to be, I thought you were at the hospital. Your mother said you were still sick. I got better. I stepped aside, clearing the doorway. Come inside, Lyle. He climbed the last 2 steps, crossing the threshold with his carry-on rolling behind him. The moment both feet were inside, Detective Garrett moved into view. Lyle Mercer, Garrett said, his badge already raised. You're under arrest for attempted murder conspiracy to commit murder and life insurance fraud. Hands behind your back. Lyle's face went white. What this is, Briar, what is this? I said nothing. I maintained eye contact as Officer Miller pulled Lyle's hands behind his back, as the handcuffs clicked into place, as Garrett read him his rights in that measured tone cops use when they've done this 1,000 times before. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Lyle kept looking at me, kept waiting for me to tell him this was a mistake, that I'd fix it. His eyes were desperate, searching my face for the woman who'd loved him, who'd trusted him, who'd almost died, not understanding why her husband wanted her dead. That woman was gone. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Officer Martinez picked up the carry-on. Chen guided Lyle toward the door. My husband. The man I'd married 6 years ago. The father of my child. The person who'd spent 14 months poisoning me with arsenic stolen from a gym locker, stumbled as they led him past me. Briar, please, whatever they told you, it's not, I can explain. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? Garrett finished. Lyle's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. I memorized his face in that moment. The shock, the calculations still running behind his eyes, trying to find an angle, a story, a way to talk himself out of handcuffs. The fear creeping in as he realized none of his plans had accounted for this, for me being alive, aware, standing in our doorway watching him get arrested. 14 months of recordings, 14 months of documenting every meal he'd prepared, every symptom he'd caused, every lie he'd told while I got sicker. All of it had been for this single second, the second where Lyle Mercer understood he'd lost. It was worth every minute. They walked him to the patrol car. I followed, staying on the front steps as Chen opened the back door and guided Lyle inside. Garrett stopped beside me. You want to come to the station? He asked. You don't have to. You've done enough. I'm coming. I rode in Garrett's sedan, following the patrol car through morning traffic. Lyle sat in the back seat ahead of us, his head bowed, hands cuffed behind him. At a red light on Michigan Avenue, Garrett pulled an evidence bag from the center console. Inside was Lyle's phone, seized when they'd patted him down. We'll do a full forensic sweep, Garrett said, but I want to check something first. He powered on the phone. The lock screen showed 2 missed calls from Cressida and 1 notification message sent. Garrett's eyebrows rose. He tapped the notification. The phone screen glowed blue in his hand as the message thread with Cressida opened. The most recent text had been sent at exactly 9 a.m., 5 minutes before Lyle's arrest. I leaned forward from the back seat, reading the words once, twice, 3 times before the letters stopped wavering in my vision. It's done. Suicide staging perfect. Insurance pays in 6 months. Cayman account ready. Garrett let out a low whistle. Scheduled send. He programmed this to go out at 9 because that's when he expected you to be dead. My hands gripped the back of his seat. The message was right there, glowing on the screen, a perfect self-recorded confession sent automatically because Lyle had been so confident in his timeline. So certain he'd walk into our home at 9:05 and find me already gone. The light turned green. Garrett rolled down his window and called to Officer Miller in the patrol car ahead. Pull over, now! Both vehicles stopped on the shoulder of Michigan Avenue. Garrett got out, walked to the patrol car, and opened Lyle's door. He held up the phone so Lyle could see the screen. Your phone sent this at 9 a.m., Garrett said. To Cressida. Want to explain what suicide staging perfect means? Lyle stared at the message. His face went gray. I got out of the sedan and walked to the patrol car. Read it again, I said to Garrett. I want to hear every word. Garrett read the message aloud, his voice carrying over the traffic noise. When he reached the part about the insurance payout, Lyle closed his eyes. We got back in our vehicles. Garrett started the engine toward the station, then paused with his hand on the gear shift. The message mentions a Cayman account, he said. Your mother-in-law already emptied your joint account, but this suggests a second offshore account we don't know about yet. I looked at the patrol car ahead of us. Through the rear window, I could see the back of Lyle's head. His jaw was tight, his shoulders rigid. There's more money hidden, Garrett said. And he just told us exactly where to look. The officer's gloved hand pulled a small amber vial from Lyle's jacket inner pocket, and everyone in the room went silent. We'd returned to the house after Garrett spotted the Cayman account reference. He wanted a full evidence sweep before Lyle's arraignment, and I'd insisted on being there to watch them catalog every piece of my husband's double life. The forensics team had already bagged his laptop, his carry-on, the toiletries kit from his suitcase. Now Officer Martinez stood in our bedroom, holding Lyle's travel jacket, checking the pockets one by one. The vial was maybe 2 inches tall prescription label wrapped around amber glass. Martinez held it up to the light. Garrett crossed the room in 3 steps. He took the vial, read the label, and his jaw tightened. This is dimercaprol, Garrett said. Arsenic antidote. Prescription dated 6 months ago, refilled twice. I stared at the vial. The liquid inside caught the morning light, golden and viscous. Lyle had carried this every day in his jacket pocket. While he fed me poisoned meals and documented my declining health, he'd kept the cure within arm's reach. Lyle was already being processed and held tightly at the precinct, leaving the forensics team and Detective Garrett free to thoroughly sweep our property under the authority of the federal warrant. Inside his travel documents, Garrett found a receipt from a Cayman bank dated 4 months ago and a handwritten note in Cressida's sloping script that read, "Only when she stops breathing, not before." He was poisoning you while inoculating himself, Garrett said, his voice flat. This is premeditation in a bottle, every defense attorney's nightmare. Martinez bagged the vial. Garrett made a note on his tablet. I watched Lyle's face as the evidence disappeared into the clear plastic bag. He didn't look guilty. He looked betrayed, like someone had just stolen his alibi, his safety net, the thing that was supposed to keep him above suspicion. Because how could a man poisoning his wife carry the antidote right there in his pocket where anyone could find it? Except no one was supposed to find it. I was supposed to be dead. The prescription's in your name. Garrett continued reading from his tablet. Filled at a pharmacy in Evanston. Dr. Raymond Holt, prescribing physician. Want to tell me what medical condition requires arsenic antidote? Lyle said nothing. His lawyer wasn't here yet. Anything he said now would be used against him, and even through his panic, his self-preservation instincts were kicking in. Martinez found 2 more things in the jacket, a receipt from a Cayman bank dated 4 months ago, and a handwritten note in Cressida's sloping script that read, "Only when she stops breathing, not before." Garrett photographed both, bagged both, and told Officer Miller to take Lyle back to the station. I rode with Garrett again. Neither of us spoke during the drive. The evidence bag sat in a box between us. The vial, the note, the receipt, the phone with its automated confession. 14 months of invisible poisoning, and Lyle had kept receipts for all of it. At the station, Garrett led me to an observation room with one-way glass overlooking interrogation. Lyle sat inside at a metal table, hands still cuffed, waiting for his court-appointed attorney. You don't have to watch this, Garrett said. Interrogation can take hours. We have enough to charge him without a confession. I'm staying. The door opened behind us. A man in his mid-50s entered, carrying 3 thick file folders and a laptop case. He had iron gray hair, weathered features, and the careful posture of someone who'd spent decades sitting in observation rooms exactly like this one. Detective Garrett, he said, extending a hand. Conrad Langley, FBI liaison. I've been coordinating the multi-state investigation into Estelle Hampton/Cressida Mercer. Garrett shook his hand. Didn't know we had FBI involvement. You didn't until this morning. Conrad set the folders on the observation room table and looked at me. Mrs. Mercer, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. What I'm about to show you is going to reframe everything you think you know about your husband's crime. He opened the first folder. Inside were crime scene photos, insurance documents, and a police report from Philadelphia dated March 2017. Victim 1, Conrad said. Teresa Dutton, age 34, died of acute arsenic poisoning. Husband Richard Dutton collected 2.1 million in life insurance. Police investigated, found nothing. Case closed as accidental contamination from old pipes in their rental property. He opened the second folder. More photos, more documents, this time from Atlanta. Victim 2. Marcus Webb's wife, you know this story. Cressida moved to Chicago after Marcus was arrested. That was 2021. He opened the third folder. My own face stared back at me from a hospital intake photo taken 4 months ago. Victim 3, you, except you didn't die. I looked at the 3 folders laid out side by side. 3 women, 3 insurance policies, 3 husbands who'd fed them poison. Your mother-in-law has done this twice before, Conrad said. Different cities, same pattern. Find a narcissistic man with gambling debt, groom him, plant the idea, provide the method, take a cut of the insurance. Lyle didn't come up with this plan, I said. The words felt strange in my mouth. She groomed him. For 18 months. Conrad pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. We found the receipts. Every casino trip, every late-night call, every session where she convinced him this was his only way out. She built him into this. Garrett leaned over the laptop screen. How long have you been tracking her? Since the Marcus Webb case. His arrest triggered flags in our financial crimes unit. The life insurance payout structure matched the Dutton case. When Webb mentioned his mother-in-law suggested the plan, we started looking at Estelle Hampton's history. Conrad scrolled through the timeline. She changed her name 4 times, moved cities after each case, always targeted men with specific psychological profiles, narcissistic, financially desperate, easily manipulated. I stared through the one-way glass at Lyle. How many times can you be both victim and villain in the same story? He'd poisoned me for 14 months. He'd stolen arsenic from Vernon's locker, documented every symptom, planned my suicide staging. And he'd done it all because his mother had spent a year and a half convincing him it was the only solution. It didn't excuse anything, but it reframed everything. The men, I said. What happened to them after? Conrad's expression darkened. He slid a 4th file across the table unmarked. Philadelphia 2017, our first case. Richard Dutton collected the insurance, paid Cressida her cut. He opened the file. 6 months later, he committed suicide. Single gunshot, no note. Cressida inherited everything through a forged will. I almost felt sorry for Lyle when Garrett slid the bank statement across the table and his face went blank. Conrad had left the observation room to coordinate with Interpol on Cressida's extradition. I'd stayed watching through the one-way glass as Garrett prepared for the interrogation. Lyle sat alone at the metal table, hands cuffed in front of him, now staring at nothing. His lawyer had arrived 20 minutes ago, a tired-looking public defender named Morton, who'd spent most of that time reading the evidence summary with increasingly worried expressions. Garrett entered the interrogation room carrying a manila folder and a printed bank statement. He sat across from Lyle without preamble. Your mother emptied the account at 11 p.m. the night before we arrested you, Garrett said. $847,000, wired to an offshore cascade we're still tracing. Lyle's eyes dropped to the statement. I watched his face from behind the glass, watched the exact moment the numbers registered, watched his expression flatten into something hollow. She was supposed to wait, Lyle said. His voice was barely audible through the speaker. We agreed. After the insurance cleared. After your wife was dead and you'd collected the payout, Garrett finished. Then she'd take her cut and disappear. That was the plan. Lyle said nothing. Except she didn't wait, Garrett continued. She took everything the moment you left for your business trip, while you were in New York thinking about the final dose, thinking about how you'd staged the suicide your mother was draining every account you had access to. Morton leaned over to read the statement. His face paled. How much debt are you carrying, Lyle? Garrett asked. Lyle's jaw worked. 1.8 million. And now you have 0 assets, 0 income, a wife who survived your murder attempt, and a prison sentence that starts at 15 years minimum. Garrett leaned back in his chair. You're not the first son she's abandoned. You won't be the last. I stood very still in the observation room. Through the glass, Lyle's hands started to shake. Those hands. The ones that had measured poison into my coffee every morning for 6 months. The ones that had stroked my hair when I was too weak to stand. The ones that had held our son while planning my death. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, no anger. Just a vast, empty space where love used to be. Lyle had destroyed himself chasing money that was never real, following a plan his mother had used on two other men before him. He'd poisoned me for 14 months to pay off debts he'd never escape, and the woman who'd convinced him it was his only option had robbed him blind the moment he committed to murder. "I want to make a deal," Lyle said suddenly. Morton put a hand on his arm. "Don't! I can tell you where she goes." Lyle's words came faster now, desperate. How she moves money, the contacts she uses, the accounts she has set up. I know her patterns, her backup plans. "We've been tracking her since the Marcus Webb case," Garrett said. "We know more about your mother than you do." Lyle stopped. "What?" "Estelle Hampton, Cressida Mercer, Caroline Dutton, Miranda Webb." Garrett ticked off the names on his fingers. 4 identities across 3 states. She's been on our radar for 4 years. The moment Conrad Langley connected the Webb case to Philadelphia, we started building a file. "Then why didn't you arrest her?" Lyle's voice cracked. "If you knew, we needed proof. We needed her to commit again so we could catch her in the act." Garrett's expression was stone. "Congratulations, you gave us that proof." In the observation room, I gripped the edge of the table. They'd known. The FBI had known Cressida was setting up another victim, and they'd waited. They'd let Lyle poison me for 14 months because they needed him to complete the crime to build their case. No, that wasn't fair. They hadn't known about me specifically. They'd been tracking Cressida's movements, watching for her pattern to repeat, and by the time they'd identified Lyle as the target, I was already sick and the evidence collection had already begun. Still, the thought sat heavy in my chest. "I can still help," Lyle said. "There are things she wouldn't tell you. Private details, family." "We traced her to Grand Cayman yesterday," Garrett interrupted. "Interpol has eyes on her location. We're coordinating extradition as we speak." Lyle went very still. "You already have her. We will by end of day tomorrow." "Then what do you need me for?" Garrett stood collecting his folder. "We don't." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lyle stared up at the detective, and I watched his face cycle through shock, humiliation, rage, and finally settle into something broken. He'd thought he had leverage. He'd thought his cooperation meant something, that his inside knowledge of Cressida's operation would buy him a reduced sentence or protective treatment. What's worse, learning you tried to murder your wife, or learning you were never important enough to save. Lyle had spent 14 months executing a plan that was doomed from the start. Cressida had been setting him up to take the fall while she disappeared with the money. The FBI had been watching him commit crimes to build their case. His wife had been recording every poisoned meal, documenting his confession in real time. And now the police had his mother tracked to an island while his own cooperation offer was worth exactly nothing. He'd been obsolete before he even started. Garrett reached the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "One more thing," he said, turning back. "The Philadelphia victim. Richard Dutton's suicide forensics just reopened the case. New evidence places Cressida in his house the night he died." Lyle looked up sharply. "She doesn't leave loose ends, Lyle." Garrett tapped the folder against his palm. "You should request protective custody, because once she's in custody and realizes you're the witness that connects all 3 cases, you become a problem she'll want to solve." He left. The door clicked shut. Lyle sat alone at the table with his lawyer, staring at the bank statement that proved his mother had abandoned him and the sudden knowledge that he might not survive long enough to serve his sentence. I found the zip bag myself, wedged behind the balcony planter, where Lyle thought the February wind would blow it away. Garrett had driven me back to the house at 2 p.m. for the final evidence sweep. The forensics team was inside cataloging Lyle's office, searching for financial records that might connect to Cressida's offshore accounts. I'd walked out onto the balcony for air, away from the methodical dismantling of my marriage, and spotted the corner of clear plastic peeking out from behind the ceramic pot that held our dead tomato plant. I pulled it out. The bag was small, sandwich-sized, with a white residue coating the bottom corner. "Detective," I called through the open door. Garrett came out, took one look at the bag, and pulled an evidence glove from his pocket. He held it up to the light. "This is your smoking gun," he said. "Original packaging. We can trace the purchase, match the residue to the arsenic, and your blood work prove chain of custody." I stared at the bag. Lyle had stood on this balcony, Our balcony, where we'd had coffee on Sunday mornings, where Silas had planted seeds in little cups last spring and thrown away the evidence of my slow murder. He'd assumed the wind would carry it off, scatter it into some alley 3 stories down, where it would never be found. He'd assumed wrong. The forensics team found more in his office. A hard drive hidden in a locked drawer contained offshore money transfer records dating back 18 months. Printed emails from Cressida carefully filed with a December 15th deadline circled in red pen. Garrett read one aloud in the living room, while the team photographed the rest. December 15th, 2024. Policy converted to lower payout after that date. He looked up at me. He needed you dead by Christmas. But I was still alive in January, I said. The pieces clicked into place. That's why he got more aggressive. The hairdryer, the staircase. You survived past his deadline. Garrett set the email down. That made you dangerous instead of just inconvenient. The longer you lived, the more desperate he became and the more likely he was to make mistakes. I walked to the window. Outside, Chicago was gray and cold, the same view I'd looked at every day for 6 years. The same buildings, the same street, the same sky. But I was seeing it differently now. I'd survived past Lyle's deadline. I'd lived long enough to become dangerous. The zip bag still smelled faintly metallic when they bagged it. I'd held it in my bare hand without fear the poison couldn't hurt me anymore. The worst had already happened. I'd ingested it for 14 months, felt it destroy my body cell by cell, watched my hair fall out and my skin turn gray. A bag with residue was nothing, just evidence, just proof. The forensics team finished at 3:45. Garrett shook my hand at the door. We have everything we need, he said. The DA will file formal charges tomorrow. With the physical evidence, the recordings, and the confession message, this is as solid as cases get. What about Cressida? Conrad's coordinating with Interpol. She fled to Belize, no extradition treaty with the U.S. It's going to be complicated. He left. The door clicked shut. I stood alone in the apartment. 12 years of marriage surrounded me. The couch we'd picked out together when we first moved in. The bookshelf I'd assembled while Lyle was at work, proud of doing it myself. The framed photographs on the wall, our wedding, Silas's first birthday, a trip to Michigan where we'd rented a cabin and pretended we were happy. The apartment was a crime scene now, a museum, a graveyard, everything but a home. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. Are you okay? Margaret asked immediately. I saw the news. They're saying... It's true, I said. All of it. Lyle's been arrested. Cressida will be soon. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you need? I need you to help me pack. Tonight, we're leaving. Leaving where? Right here in Chicago. Every bit of it. I glanced around the living room. I can't stay in this apartment anymore. I can't raise Silas in the same place where his father almost destroyed my life. What about your things? Margaret's voice was careful. Your books, the furniture, the artwork. It's all evidence now. I walked to the Vermeer reproduction I'd restored 3 years ago. The girl with the pearl earring I'd spent months repairing after water damage. I'd been so proud of that restoration. Now I couldn't stand to look at it. Even if it wasn't, I don't want anything that remembers him. Where will you go? I thought about Silas's drawing. The stick figure behind bars on one side, the woman and child in sunlight on the other. Somewhere Silas can draw pictures in sunlight, I said. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then, I'll be there in an hour. Pack light, will buy what you need when we get there. Get where? I have a friend in Portland. She has a guest house. No one knows about it. We can stay there until you figure out what's next. I hung up and walked through the apartment one last time. The bedroom where Lyle had held me while I cried from pain he'd caused. The kitchen where he'd made poisoned coffee every morning. The nursery where Silas had slept while his father planned his mother's death in the next room. I packed a single suitcase. Clothes for me and Silas. Our toothbrushes. The recording device with its backup drive. Silas's drawing of our future. Nothing else. Margaret arrived at 5:30. We loaded the car in silence. She didn't ask questions. She just helped me carry the one suitcase down 3 flights of stairs and put it in her trunk next to Silas's car seat. I locked the apartment door for the last time at 6 p.m. 12 years of marriage left behind without looking back. My phone buzzed as I reached the stairwell. Conrad Langley. I answered. Hello. Mrs. Mercer, we have Cressida in custody in Grand Cayman. Interpol picked her up 2 hours ago. Relief flooded through me. Thank you, There's something else. Conrad's voice was careful. She's asking to speak to you, directly, from custody. The hallway suddenly felt cold. Why would she want to talk to me? I don't know, Conrad said. But I thought you should be the one to decide whether to take the call. I felt nothing as the defense attorney called me a vindictive wife who had entrapped a vulnerable man. 4 months had passed since Conrad's call about Cressida. I declined to speak with her from custody. Whatever she wanted to say could wait for trial. In the months since I'd relocated to Portland with Silas and my mother started therapy, watched my hair grow back. The arsenic was gone from my system. The tremors had stopped. I could walk upstairs without losing my breath. Now I sat in Cook County Criminal Courthouse on a June morning listening to Lyle's court-appointed defender argue that his client had been manipulated into attempted murder by a serial predator. My client was groomed by his own mother. The defense attorney said a thin man in his 40s named Russell Kemp, who'd drawn the short straw of defending an unwinnable case. Cressida Hampton spent 18 months convincing a debt-ridden, psychologically vulnerable man that murder was his only escape. Lyle Mercer is a victim as much as his wife. I watched Kemp gesture toward Lyle at the defendant's table. My ex-husband, the divorce had finalized last month, sat in an orange jumpsuit, hands folded, trying to look remorseful. His hair had grayed at the temples. He'd lost weight. He looked smaller than I remembered. The prosecutor stood. Angela Reeves, 48, with sharp features and sharper instincts, had spent 3 months building a case so airtight that Lyle's plea deal offer had been rejected outright. The defendant's own voice, Reeves said. His own words, 14 months of premeditated cruelty, the court should listen. She pressed play on the courtroom speaker system. The compilation was 30 minutes long. Breyer's technical expert had edited together the most damning segments from 14 months of recordings. Lyle gaslighting me about imaginary symptoms, Lyle dismissing the arsenic test as a false positive, Lyle telling me everyone would be better off if I just disappeared. His voice filled the courtroom, calm and methodical and cruel. The arsenic test was a false positive, his recorded voice said. You're imagining symptoms again. You're always imagining things. I'd heard these recordings dozens of times during case preparation. They didn't affect me anymore. The courtroom speaker crackled with static between segments, and I noticed my hands resting steady in my lap. No trembling, no racing pulse, just clinical detachment. Silas sat beside me, 11 years old now, wearing the navy blue shirt my mother had picked out this morning. He'd asked why we were going to see Daddy, and I'd told him the truth. Daddy had done something very bad, and today the judge would decide his punishment. Silas had nodded seriously and asked if we could get ice cream after. The recording played for the full 30 minutes. The courtroom was silent, except for Lyle's voice over and over, building a portrait of systematic psychological abuse that had run parallel to the physical poisoning. You're crazy, the recording said. No one believes you. The doctors think you're making it up for attention. When it finished, Judge Patricia Caldwell, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over the case with zero tolerance for manipulation tactics, looked at the defense table. Does the defendant wish to make a statement before sentencing? Lyle stood. My mother convinced me I never meant. His voice broke. Real tears ran down his face. Maybe he was genuinely remorseful. Maybe he was just sorry he'd been caught. I didn't care enough to guess. I loved my wife, Lyle said. I love my son. I made a terrible mistake. Judge Caldwell's expression didn't change. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was attempt to murder your wife slowly over 14 months while psychologically torturing her and planning to orphan your child. Sit down. Lyle sat. The judge reviewed her notes for a long moment. Then she looked up. Lyle Mercer, you are hereby sentenced to 14 years in state prison for attempted murder in the first-degree insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of your sentence. She paused. Given the calculated nature of your crime and your attempts to manipulate this court with claims of victimization, I am recommending against early parole consideration. The bailiff stood. Lyle turned in his seat, searching the gallery until he found me. Our eyes met. I realized I wasn't watching my husband being sentenced. I was watching a stranger who once knew where I kept my coffee mugs. Someone who'd shared my bed and my life and my DNA through our son, but who'd become so completely foreign that looking at his face was like looking at stock photography. Generic, unremarkable, gone. "Say something," Lyle said as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. "Tell me you're happy. Tell me you hate me. Just say something." I said nothing. I maintained eye contact as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, as the bailiff led him toward the side door as he craned his neck to keep looking at me until the door closed between us. Silas squeezed my hand. "Is Daddy going to time out now?" "Yes, sweetheart." "For how long?" "A very long time." Silas nodded and didn't ask anything else. No tears, no distress, just the calm acceptance of a child who'd drawn this exact ending in crayon 4 months ago. Man behind bars, woman and child safe in sunlight. Detective Garrett touched my shoulder from the row behind us. "You okay?" "I'm fine." I stood to leave, gatoring my bag and holding Silas's hand as we moved toward the aisle. Lyle was gone, led through the heavy security doors to begin his 14-year sentence. He was going to serve his time alone, a pawn abandoned by the very woman who had written his script. Angela Reeves approached me near the exit doors, her briefcase packed. "Mrs. Mercer," the prosecutor said quietly, "you did incredibly well today. Your documentation and the recordings gave the judge no choice but to apply the maximum sentence." "Thank you, Angela," I said, looking down at Silas, who was pulling gently on my sleeve. "Is there any update from the federal side?" Reeves sighed, her expression tightening. "Conrad Langley is still working with Interpol. The asset trail from the Cayman accounts has gone dark, and they believe Estelle has already slipped across another border. She wasn't at the defense table today, but the federal warrant remains active globally." I nodded, clutching my purse. The mastermind who had orchestrated my slow death was still a phantom in international waters. But as I guided my son out of the courthouse and into the morning air, I knew that her net was shrinking, and my family was finally beyond her reach. I didn't feel betrayed when Conrad told me Cressida had slipped through Interpol's net. I felt vindicated that monsters don't surrender quietly. Estelle Hampton had managed to stay one step ahead of the wire transfers. While Lyle sat in a state penitentiary, his mother remained a phantom, a ghost fading into the financial underworld of Central America. Now, 1 week later, I sat in Conrad Langley's office at Chicago Police Department headquarters, while he explained how the FBI's primary target had vanished. "She paid a boat captain," Conrad said, sliding a thin file across his desk. "Cash transaction, no record left Grand Cayman waters 48 hours before we arrived with extradition papers. By the time Interpol realized she was gone, the trail was cold." I opened the file. Inside was a surveillance photo from a Grand Cayman marina timestamp 3 days before her scheduled transport. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses boarding a private vessel. You couldn't see her face clearly, but the posture was unmistakable. "How long until you find her?" I asked. "Interpol has her flagged at every border crossing, every airport, every port of entry between here and South America." Conrad leaned back in his chair. "We've linked 3 confirmed murder cases across 7 years. The boat captain is cooperating now, gave us account numbers, transfer routes, names of contacts in Central America. The net is narrowing." "But she's still out there." "She's still out there," Conrad confirmed. "Could be months. Could be years. Women like Cressida know how to disappear. She's had practice." I looked at the surveillance photo again. Cressida walking up a gangplank carry-on bag over her shoulder, boarding a boat that would take her somewhere Interpol couldn't follow. How many women had she groomed by proxy? How many husbands had she convinced to poison their wives, promising them insurance money and freedom while planning to steal everything and vanish? How many more victims would there be before someone finally stopped her? "Stay vigilant," Conrad said. "She has no reason to contact you, but if she does, I'll call you immediately." He nodded. "You did good work, Mrs. Mercer. The recordings, the documentation, without that, we'd never have connected the pattern. You saved lives by surviving." I left his office and drove back to my mother's house where Silas was finger painting in the kitchen. I didn't tell him about Cressida. He'd stopped asking about his grandmother months ago, the way children forget people who disappear from their lives. I wanted to keep it that way. 3 months passed. I'd started a new job at an art conservation studio in downtown Portland, restoring paintings for local galleries. Silas had enrolled in a new school. We had a small apartment with a balcony where he could draw in sunlight exactly like his crayon prophecy. My hair had grown back completely. The tremors were gone. I could walk upstairs, carry groceries, live without checking every meal for metallic taste. Then in September, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I know you won't forgive me, but I'm still Silas's father. Sign the appeal documents. Please. I was sick. I can change. Lyle. I stared at the message for a long moment. Lyle wasn't supposed to have phone access. His contact restriction order prohibited any communication with me outside of court-supervised proceedings. Someone had smuggled a phone into the prison, or he'd convinced another inmate to send this on his behalf. I reread the message once before taking action. I was sick. I can change. The same manipulation, the same tactics, the same belief that the right words would make me forget 14 months of poison and gaslighting. I noticed I felt nothing reading his plea. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just the quiet relief of closing a file that should have been sealed months ago. I took a screenshot of the message. I opened my email and found the warden's contact information from the court documents. Warden Douglas Mitchell, Illinois Department of Corrections, Stateville Maximum Security. I attached the screenshot and typed, Inmate 847291-C, Lyle Mercer violated contact restriction order. Smuggled communication attempt attached. Please investigate. The reply came within an hour. Violation confirmed. Inmate 847291-C has been written up for unauthorized communication and use of contraband device. Good behavior review postponed 24 months. Thank you for reporting. I read the email twice. 24 months. 2 additional years before Lyle would be eligible for early parole consideration. His desperate attempt to manipulate me into helping him had just extended his minimum sentence from 12 years to 14. I deleted his message. Then I deleted the warden's confirmation email. Lyle's name left my thoughts for the last time filed away in a place I would never need to access again. 6 months later, a postcard arrived at my apartment. The front showed a beach in Belize turquoise water and white sand. I flipped it over. Conrad's handwriting, spotted in San Pedro. Surveillance attached, check your email. I opened my laptop. The email contained a single surveillance photo, time-stamped 2 days ago, a woman in her 60s with dyed blonde hair sitting at an outdoor cafe. Across from her sat a man in his 50s with gray hair, an expensive watch, and a wedding ring. He was leaning forward, listening intently while she gestured with her hands in animated conversation. Cressida had found a new target. I studied the photo for 30 seconds. The man's posture, his expensive clothing, the way he was hanging on her every word. She was already working him, already building trust, already planning which wife would die and which son would go to prison while she disappeared with the money. I closed the laptop. I took Conrad's postcard to the kitchen, held it over the sink, and lit it with a match. The cardboard caught quickly, curling and blackening as the beach scene disappeared into ash. I washed the remains down the drain. That was someone else's fight now. I had a life to build, a son to raise, a future that had nothing to do with poison or betrayal or women who taught their sons to murder. Cressida Hampton could run forever. She could groom a dozen more men, orchestrate a dozen more murders. Interpol would catch her eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, I was done. The divorce papers sat unsigned on Carol Brennan's desk for exactly 4 minutes before I picked up the pen. Not hesitation, just presence. I wanted to feel the weight of the moment, the formal end of something that had tried to end me first. Full custody granted, Carol said. 0 contact rights. The appeal was denied Monday. The audio evidence alone made it irrefutable. I signed. Steady hand, clean signature. Nothing like the trembling handwriting on the emergency room forms 18 months ago. Outside November had turned Chicago the color of ash. I drove north without looking back. 2 months later, Saugatuck, a January morning sharp enough to cut. Lake Michigan wore its winter face, pewter water, white sky waves that moved like slow breathing. Our cottage sat 3 blocks from the shore, small and bright, smelling of cedar and salt. I was in the kitchen when Silas came downstairs. He was taller now, quieter in a different way than before. Not the silence of a child carrying something too heavy, but the quiet of someone learning to simply exist without bracing for what comes next. I poured macadamia milk into his cup, white, pale in the winter light. He stopped at the counter's edge, didn't reach for it. You watched me pour it, I said softly. Same hands, same kitchen. Silas looked at the cup for a long moment. His jaw worked the way it did when he was deciding something privately in the language children use before words catch up. Then he picked it up. One sip, then another. It's good, he said, simply, like that was enough. It was. After breakfast, I walked to the studio, the converted garage facing north, flooded with the kind of flat gray light that shows everything honestly. On the easel sat the one piece I'd carried from Chicago, a painting Estelle had given us at our wedding. I'd never questioned it then. Under UV light, the truth surfaced quickly. Modern pigment, recent canvas, a forgery layered over something older and real, hidden beneath decades of deliberate deception. Even her gift had been constructed to mislead. I dipped my restoration brush and began. Outside, Silas was drawing in the wet sand with a stick. A house, a garden, a figure with arms wide open. The tide would take it in an hour. He was already planning the next one. Some futures don't need to last forever. They just need to be built. And somewhere beneath all those layers of careful deception, the original brushwork waited patient, intact, entirely worth uncovering. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. The people closest to you can become the greatest danger, but your instinct to survive is stronger than any poison. Don't make my mistake of ignoring the warning signs. I rationalized Lyle's behavior for too long, told myself his devotion was love when it was actually control. I dismissed my own instincts because I couldn't imagine that family betrayal could run so deep. Trust your gut when something feels wrong, even if you can't name what it is yet, especially when it comes from someone you love. The lesson I learned is that family betrayal doesn't excuse giving up on yourself. Cressida's twisted form of family revenge, teaching her son to poison innocent wives for insurance money, destroyed 3 families before mine. But I chose a different path. I documented everything I survived, and I fought back through the legal system. I believe God gave me the strength to endure those 14 months so I could protect not just myself and Silas, but the next woman she would have targeted. Sometimes the worst family betrayal teaches you who you really are, and family revenge is never the answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced family betrayal or witnessed family revenge destroy lives? Your story might help someone else recognize the warning signs. Please share this with anyone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in standing up to those who hurt us, subscribe to Her Revenge, because every survivor's voice matters. Thank you for staying until the very end. While this story contains fictional elements for emphasis and privacy, the core message about recognizing danger and choosing survival is real. Trust your instincts and take care of yourself.